A couple of days ago, I released a video about how long people keep their phones. And while the number one answer in that actually didn't surprise me, the number two answer absolutely shocked me. You need to watch that video. I'll leave a link in the description below and in the end card, because when you combine that video with this video, you get an overall picture of what's actually going on out there in the world as far as smartphones go. Now, of course, if you're an enthusiast, when you're online and you're watching a bunch of YouTube videos about smartphones, your thoughts about how smartphones work and how people are using them might be slightly skewed. And listen, let's be honest, other tech YouTubers are maybe skewing that as well, because the reality is in order for you to watch, we need to talk about the things you're interested in. YouTube doesn't necessarily help with that sometimes. We make videos about certain things, and then if you do like them, sometimes you don't even get to see them. So it may seem that people are buying $1,000 phones all the time and then renewing them or actually upgrading their phone every single year, because that's kind of the narrative of watching tech YouTube. But that's not actually what's going on. As a matter of fact, this particular poll that I put out on my community tab again surprised me, not as the number one answer of how much do you spend on a phone, but what the number two answer was. Again, much like my last poll, it was just an answer I threw out there randomly, and it was the number two most selected answer. I gotta tell you, these polls are kind of fun. We're gonna have to do more of them here on the channel, but let's talk a little bit about what the answers were in this particular poll and how much you should spend on your next smartphone right after this.
This is, you listening to Travis.
What up, players? Welcome back. And for all you new people, welcome. My name's Travis and I do tech videos every single week and have a blast doing them. If that sounds like fun to you, sit back, relax, and enjoy the video. Anything I talk about will be in the description below. But for now, let's just get into the video. So a couple of weeks ago, I put up a poll on my community tab about how much your smartphone costs. Figured I would get maybe 1,000 people to show up. And much like my last video where I talked about that 3,000 people showed up for a poll I didn't expect many people to show up for, 3,000 of you showed up again for this poll. I'm really ecstatic about this. And it gave me a lot of good data, like how much are you spending on your phones? I personally do reviews and I talk about a lot of the flagship phones, which are over $1,000. But lately, as you've been noticing over this past year, I'm definitely also concentrating on some mid-level phones, because I think the value proposition of phones from $500 and below is actually super strong right now. Apparently you agree. We're going to talk about some of these kind of broken down segments, but let's talk about the number one answer, which wasn't terribly a surprise for me. Number one was over $700 phones, and that actually wasn't even close. That one won by a large margin. And I guess that's not really a surprise, because again, I cover so many of the flagship level phones, and most people that are actually going to go online and watch a lot of videos about smartphones are looking at some of the higher level stuff. Even if they can't necessarily buy it, it does seem like a lot of people are interested in the higher end phones, the Samsung and Apples of the world. No doubt, since the iPhone XR was the hottest selling phone of 2019 and the 11 of so far 2020, I guess those kind of flagship level-ish phones are definitely in the front of everyone's mind. And with different payment plans and trade-in values, you actually can get some high-end, up-to-the-year smartphones for a pretty decent deal. Samsung especially has been doing some really aggressive trade-in values for their last couple of phones. You might want to check that out whenever a new phone is released. Same thing with Apple. Apple's had a couple of decent trade-in deals, and inevitably your carrier will do some type of buy one, get one or something like that. So generally speaking, if you're not just buying them straight out, you can get a good deal. In the case of Android, especially Samsung, you only have to wait a couple months after release and you'll find some incredible deals. Now, I mentioned this before the S20 came out and people didn't seem to believe me, and I told them within 3 months there would be some deals. And there were incredible deals within 3 months. So the point is, much like driving a car off the lot, your phone's gonna diminish in the amount of money you can get back out of it very quickly. Technology moves so fast nowadays that a phone from a year ago doesn't seem quite as interesting to most people, or I should say most people that are on YouTube watching these videos. Everyone else, on the other hand, would actually see some benefit from it. Case in point, my Amazon Renewed series of videos where I've talked about buying flagship level phones from a year or two ago, things like the Note 9 or the iPhone XS or the iPhone XR, whatever, a year or so later through their Amazon Renew program, people want a good value. And it's not so much about having the top bleeding edge phone anymore. It's about getting value for money, especially in the economic situation we're in right now. And never has there been such a great opportunity for some really incredible phones than right now at all price points. And that brings me to what the number 2 price that people chose was. But before I get there, $700 and above, that's pretty much all flagship level phones, so it's not a surprise. But number 2 was an answer I put in as kind of like a last second thing. I didn't think people would actually click it, but I guess maybe because of my own ignorance of not knowing how many incredible phones are at this price range. But look at what number 2 was. I didn't even know there was good phones at that price range. It's one thing to find some phones around $300 or something like that. I mean, there are some more coming out. I've even reviewed the $250 TCL 10L here on this channel. It's a great phone for the price. I'm seeing a lot of phones in the $200 to $300 range that are pretty amazing. But I actually didn't know about this kind of middle segment. I mean, I guess I didn't know that phones were good there because I actually have reviewed a couple $100 phones on this channel, and it was a while ago, and they were terrible. So I was actually amazed that this was the number 2 answer. But upon looking at Amazon and just kind of opening your eyes to other phones, you might find that there's some really incredible deals. Just look at some of these phones. Look at the specs of some of these phones. You can get phones with incredible battery life, incredible screens, and just look amazing for under $300. We live in an era right now where choice is everywhere, especially if you're on the Android side. Now, if you're on the iOS side, you got to pretty much look to the used or the iPhone SE. That's not a problem. Again, I got you covered with my Amazon Renewed series. Make sure to check that out. Leave it in the link in the description maybe, or the end card. But for new, on the Android side, man, you have so many options. Companies like Huawei, when they're not having problems getting Google Play Store on there, Redmi, Oppo, even OnePlus with this new phone they have coming out, they're really serving a lower end tier of price ranges, which is actually really kind of compelling. Now, at the beginning of 2020, I mentioned that $500 and below was going to be the Battlefield. Little did I know the Battlefield might be under $300. And obviously with the amount of people that voted for this as the number 2 pricing that they bought their phones at, you're all going to come in the comments and tell me, yeah, Travis, there's a ton of phones at this price range. Sorry, I didn't know. I mean, obviously you can buy a phone secondhand for around that price, but I'm not really talking about that. Look at these new phones on Amazon. And that doesn't cover all the phones that are available, especially in places like India, where there are phones that I have never seen or heard of before. I guarantee for prices that would blow all of our minds, including specs like 90 Hz screens and 4K video and all the things that we get excited about on the latest Samsung or iPhone. Like, they're doing it at prices that are kind of ridiculous. So this makes me look at brands like Samsung and Apple slightly differently. Are you really giving us our value at that top tier price? For the regular phones like Samsung, they're trying to do it with the 100 times zoom and all these things that don't really matter, and we know how that turned out. The Fold series of phones is kind of interesting because the technology is so cutting edge that the price kind of makes sense. Those folding phones are interesting, so it makes sense for them to be over $1,000. But the normal form factor phone just shouldn't be over $1,000. Some people will say, well, you put in a bigger battery, you need to charge more for it. But there's so many phones with 5,000 milliamp hour batteries right now. Bigger batteries than are in most of the S20 line. So what are we talking about? Or 100 times zoom. That's been in phones under $1,300 for well over a year. This is not new stuff. And as far as Apple goes, I can't really give them a pass either. But the problem for Apple is slightly different. They are selling things at these prices because people are paying for them. Case in point, the sales of their phones are ridiculous right now. They should be absolutely struggling, and they're totally not. Samsung, on the other hand, is being stubborn. Their phones are not selling well. And it's not because they're not great phones, but they're priced inappropriately. If they were priced a little bit better, they'd probably sell better. I've done lots of videos this year about what phones are selling well. Maybe I'll leave one in the end card at the end if you're really interested. Listen, at the end of the day, their low-end priced phones, Samsungs, are selling well. Their higher-end phones are just not. Wouldn't it be amazing if Samsung took the tact and said, look, we're gonna give you a top flagship level phone for $600 and below. So the question remains, how much should you spend on your next smartphone? Well, there's a couple of ways of looking at this. Number one, if you look at the last poll that I took, at how long people are tending to keep their phones. The number one answer was 2 years. The number two answer still blows me away. You have to go see that video. And this poll says $700. A $700 for 2 years is about $350 a year. Divide that by 12 for a monthly thing, and that's math. I'm not going to do that here and embarrass myself. But it seems to me there's enough value in the sub $500 category that if you spread that over 2 years at $250 a year and then divide 250 by 12, that's like $20 a month. Did I do the math right on that one? Even if I didn't, do you understand what I'm getting at? That's like a Netflix subscription, which by the way is too expensive nowadays. So how much is it worth to you? My guess is the vast majority of the things that you use your phone for are easily covered by a $300 phone. More so than you might even be aware of. Check out some of the phones that I've shown you today. I'll maybe leave some links in the description below just so you can check them out. I'm pretty amazed by the quality of some of these, and I've actually reviewed one of them fairly recently. I'll leave a link to that right here. And don't forget the Amazon Renewed series, which I'll also leave a link to. See you later. Peace and love.